All right, we have uploaded assignment 1. Now we move on to introducing assignment 2. And a good place to start is with past student examples. I'm just going to look at them very quickly to show what's required of you. You're going to be required to post a sketch, just like you did for the first, and then a finished composite. You have the option of also uploading an inspiration photo. So like this one was the inspiration image. And I'm going to recommend Pokemon because they're clean, basic shapes. The sketch, where you are going to figure out the anatomy of the creature and how everything needs to work believably. And then what kind of references you're going to be searching for to fulfill those needs. So we're going to work this slightly differently. Instead of sketching from references we find, we sketch from an inspiration we find, and then we search for references based on what we think would serve our sketch. And then there's the final. The other place you can always look, and you should look, is at the course assignment description, right? So if you go under modules and then to assignment sheets, you'll see under assignment 2, this is our assignment sheet page. Just a one-page description of it. Just like our landscape, we want to make this at least 300 pixels per inch. Our preferred lab resolution is 350, and up to as large as 13 by 19 inches, but at least 8 by 10 inches. So we're going to be making this quite a large creature composite as well. I also give a link, and the link takes you to here, which is just a giant Pokemon database. Because when you're dealing with imagined creatures, we can really only imagine things we've already seen and then just combine them in different ways. So any of these Pokemon, these crazy creatures, they are combining aspects you find in other things, right? So maybe a big cat, maybe a starfish, a cloud, more kind of sea creature stuff here, you know, just lots of different textures and things. And to be inspired by one of these, but then to build it with real reference is the challenge we're going to work with. So for instance, I picked a few that I liked. I'm thinking a little bit of the fantasy landscape I chose and what would make sense with it, but not entirely. I want to first and foremost make a creature I think is really interesting. I like that this kind of combines a mole with a pig, with a raccoon, with a mastodon. You can get pretty creative. This is the one I'm most excited about, though. I love the idea of a little crustacean-like creature that has a rock for a shell and can camouflage in my landscape, and that might make for some fun animation later. But I really like dinosaur kind of thing, so I might conflate those two together in my sketch. And then ultimately I'll be building it out of realistic reference, kind of photographic reference. Okay, so once I've looked over the assignment sheet, I'm ready to go look for some inspiration. And so then what do we do with that? Well, to give you some background, before we can even start looking for reference, we need to understand how figurative content is designed digitally. It's different than designing a setting. Because the difference with figures is that they need to have structure to them. They need to make sense in terms of moving, whereas lakes and rivers and mountains and sky, they just are. But with a creature, you need to, if you see a leg, you also need to believe that that leg can move, has a place to go, can hold weight, can support itself, otherwise the illusion falls apart. So we're going to start by going back to basic shapes and kind of understanding what's called the skeletal template of our creature design. And that's why it's helpful to look at a Pokemon. And then we decide how we build up on that skeletal template, where we want certain textures, certain weight. And then if I'm a digital designer, I refine from there, and I'm drawing my own marks, and I'm doing inking, and I'm cleaning up the inking. Maybe I turn it into a clean vector outline like Digital 2 is doing right now. And then that allows me to color behind it and finish off my artwork. But if you're compositing, it's a little different. Because when you're compositing, you're going out and you're finding reference for the different components you want. So first you need to sketch something that's believable, and then you need to find reference that will fit to your sketch, that will make all the angles work right, and so that the overall silhouette and shape of your creature communicates your idea. And that's why Pokemon are so great, because their silhouettes are very strong at communicating what that creature design is all about. One of my favorite cartoons growing up was Voltron. Voltron has a very straightforward way of coming together. So this is a clever composite someone did using real cat photos and compositing them to fit that Voltron reference. So if you think of Voltron as the sketch, it was always shown in 3/4 view to really showcase how that robot looked. So this artist had to find cat reference and make it match those proportions. It wasn't just taking any old cat reference that looked good and building on it. It was matching the cat to the idea. So when it's done well, the anatomy will feel very believable, even with something as fantastic as this. And this anatomy I have some problems with because it feels like that neck is coming from the shoulder blades instead of from above the collarbone. But you can see how the textures blend. Also, that snake head is getting too big for coming from back there. But that's being nitpicky. Here's some digital concept paintings that try to bring believable textures onto fantasy creatures we're all familiar with, like from the Super Mario Brothers world. And so that's another aspect of this. Not only are we trying to make a believable creature out of composited reference, we're trying to basically take the idea of a cartoon, if we go from a Pokemon or we go from our own idea of a Pegasus or something, and try to make it believable through our use of textures and lighting. And we might get something that looks kind of strange, but ultimately more believable. In this case, downright gross, coming up with an actual function for the little swirly design on that Pokemon. Right. So this is where I got the idea to use Pokemon as reference for this, because they seem to translate very well to believable textures, simply because their overall silhouette shape and basic shapes already communicate so much. All right. Now, just like I showed you early futurist models from the 1950s for imagined fantasy landscapes, there are taxiderm artists that do a very similar thing. They take real parts of real animals and taxiderm them together to make fantasy creatures. And it's all about how it's posed, right? And how you blend textures together to make it believable. So it's very much like our assignment. Notice, though, that this one, even though it's based on real textures, real animals, just isn't as effective overall as this one, merely because of the pose it uses. So pose matters. This is a very flat, static pose, just seeing it from one angle. So we want to make our poses, if at all possible, a little bit more dynamic. We don't want it to look like this, right? Where just one thing is wearing something else as a decoration. We want it to feel part of the anatomy. Here are some examples where these skills can take you. This is taking creatures from Samurai Jack and making it a lot more believable by using realistic texture. So if you're interested in character design and fantasies and monsters, you still will often be benefited from referencing real life subject matter. So real life tentacles and scales and snake patterns and everything else that was used to make this digital painting. We also want to avoid the Weekly World News kind of tabloid job on this. And this has some real creativity to it, using the elephant's trunk as a tail, matching that to the spine of this kangaroo. But it's also got some major flaws that we want to overcome. So this looks amateurish, we want to look more professional. So those major flaws are simply that this wing doesn't connect to anything anatomical. It looks like it might be connected to a vertebrae instead of to actual collarbones, or maybe if you're going to do wings and arms, which doesn't exist in nature, what you need to do is build that muscle around the shoulder blades. So you basically have 2 sets of pectoral muscles. And so this doesn't make any sense. It's also too soft. And the ears don't feel like they connect into the skull at the same place. And so having a basic shape anatomical sketch would fix that problem, and that's how we're going to start. So lots of mythological creatures. The first kind of Western mythological creature that combines from other elements is the Chimera. So I have that kind of featured throughout this presentation. The Griffin is another that we're very familiar with. This is another version of the Chimera. And this actually does 3 heads very well, which is almost impossible to do. But you need to allow the structure of the anatomy to give enough room for 3 distinct vertebrae to come together. So you're going to have very wide shoulders. You can't have narrow shoulders and 3 heads. It just will never look believable. This also does wings with forearms very well by basically doubling it up and having 2 sets of breastbones and pectoral muscles that can support all of that weight. And we just know it when it's believable, and we know it when it's not, when things don't feel connected. Now this slide, like that tail, isn't connected in any believable way, but it's a good reminder that we don't need to only blend together organic material. We can also bring in things like rocks, things like machines. We can have cyborgs here, but we want to avoid the copy-paste phenomena, right? So here we see the exact same reference used with very little alteration multiple times, like for every foot. And so that betrays that it's composited too. And then these are just some concept designs for vehicles, and it actually relates a lot to creatures. Here are some quick concept sketches for creature design. What they have in common is that it's all about the silhouette. It's all about the shape. It's not about the individual detail or the structure. You can squint and you can see immediately how these creatures work just by their silhouette, as if they were cut out of just black paper. And so vehicle variations here, different concepts here for a Batmobile. It's just the shape that matters more than the individual textures. So we need to start with that shape in mind and then map the believable textures to them. And it will make the work so much more believable for it. Now you can make your creature just downright terrifying. You can make it cute and cuddly. You can push it any way you want. Right? But ultimately we're going to take that character and we're going to place it into your fantasy landscape. And we want that to all be believable. So right now, for a variety of reasons, this isn't very believable. We want it to do better than these, right? And what's fun about putting a creature into a landscape is there's no rules of scale or physics that you can't make work for your idea. So I really like these little pieces of digital art that take just 8-bit artwork and blend them seamlessly into the landscape. And all it takes to do that is noticing the light source and then noticing where they actually make contact. So you can see Bowser here actually squirting up water and having a shadow and affecting this landscape in a very believable way. The reflections in the water here. This is my favorite, because there was that little cutscene from Street Fighter, the arcade, where you beat up the car. And then ultimately, when it's done well, it's just seamless. You're matching the lighting, you're matching the point of view. This is a little cat on that miniature model I showed you last time. And it can be used to some pretty creative effects. All right, so that's what we're going for. So where does it all start? You want to pick something to reference. And notice how just the silhouette really tells me a lot about each of these creatures. And then I'm going to show you how to figure out the anatomy of them. And that's where we'll get started.